If you're struggling to start a sustainable fashion brand with limited funding, I'm sharing my secret strategies on how you can successfully launch with just $0. Let's dive in. First of all, let's talk about how much this is going to cost. I know that you might have limited funding, and that's okay. So we're gonna first talk about how much this is gonna cost, and then we'll talk about how to get the funding to be able to invest in your brand. Before we dive in though, I did want to preface this and say that it's so important for you to know your numbers. Do not stick your head in the sand because you need to know what you're consciously investing in, what you're consciously not investing in, and perhaps waiting until later, and then what your break-even point is, so when your costs and your revenues are going to be able to match each other, and then when you're going to be able to make a profit. It is really important for you to know what's going on in your business. Do not shy away from the numbers. And then the other thing I wanted to say as well is that this is a generalization. Over the years, we have mastered how much our clients need to invest initially to be successful, but with your situation and your products and things like that, you could actually need more or you could need less. So with that being said and all those caveats out of the way, let's dive in. I'm going to break down 4 different categories that you typically need to invest in, and we're going to start with business setup costs. When it comes to your business setup costs, there are 2 things that you mainly need to invest in: a lawyer and an accountant. The lawyer will be more upfront, and then the accountant is someone that you will work with typically after 1 year that you've been in business, and then the tax season rolls around, and usually that's when you'll need to work with them, and that's when you need to pay them. With the lawyer and with the accountant, in order to find a good one, I recommend you scour the internet and also ask for referrals. A lot of these service providers will have free consultations, so make sure you take advantage of that. Make sure they are equipped to help you. Make sure that they don't just work with service providers, but also product-based businesses, and bonus points if they help sustainable or even fashion businesses. So make sure you look for that. And then in regards to the lawyer, there are 2 things that you'll need to work with them on. The first one is your terms and conditions and your privacy policy. These are things that will live on your website and are also essentially the ironclad agreement that you will enter in your customers with, so that if they need a refund or they need an exchange, you have all those terms outlined and you know what the protocol is. The second thing you'll want to work with your lawyer on is the incorporation. So just making sure that you protect yourself and you protect your business. Talk to a lawyer about it, but it's important that you as the founder and your business are 2 separate legal entities. So then that way, if something happens, you yourself are protected. And also from a tax perspective, that's better for you as well. So with the terms and conditions and the privacy policy, typically a lawyer will charge about 1.5 to 2K. And then with the incorporation fee, this can vary based on how complex it is, but it probably is another 1.5 to 2K as well. But do your research, ask around, get quotes, and work with someone you're comfortable with. When it comes to the accountant, again, this is typically incurred 1 year after you've been in business and the next tax season rolls around. So if you're just starting out, you don't have any revenue, so you don't have any taxes or anything to incur yet, but you do need to work with a tax accountant next year. And the fee for this will vary, but typically it's about 1.5K, I would say, and it could be less because your first year you don't have that many expenses or that much revenue yet, and so it's probably not too complex. Make sure you go out, get those free consultations, and solidify who you're going to work with. The second category are your production costs, and this is typically the category where slow fashion founders spend the most. This can be broken down into your design costs, your material costs, and also your actual manufacturing or production costs. With a new brand, we always recommend producing 1 or 2 products to keep your products lean and also your costs lean, but also make sure that you focus on those 2 products and you knock it out of the park. So make sure if you're first starting out, I do not recommend you launch a 10, 15, 20 piece collection because that's way too much. It's going to be really stressful for you from a funding perspective as well. So start with 1 to 2 products. In regards to costs, this can really vary because the complexity of the design, how much time someone will need to use to make it, the amount of materials, and even the type of garment, this all factors into play. But roughly, if you're going to be doing 1 to 2 products, you probably want to budget at least something like 30K to be able to design it, get materials, and also produce it. And I know that that's a really big figure and maybe you're freaking out right now, but don't worry, we're going to talk about how you can fund this shortly. So around 30K, and if you have less, that's okay too. And again, this varies based on how simple to how complex your garments are. And then the third category are your marketing costs. And this will vary as well, but you mainly want your website, which we typically recommend Shopify. And on Shopify, you'll just need to buy an annual subscription and then also a theme. And typically this will be about $500 for both. And then the other side of your marketing is your advertising or your influencer costs. And this can vary as well. If you don't have a huge budget, that's totally fine. With a lot of our clients, we help them organically launch and they're still very successful. But if you have some money to play with for ads and also for influencer marketing, that would be great as well. And then last but not least, your development costs. And this is for you as a founder because your learning and your development is something that you always want to invest in. Don't be the bottleneck in your business because a lot of the time, especially when you're first starting out, the business and the company can only go as far as the founder. So don't be the bottleneck. Continuously invest in mentors and programs and things like that. And think about how much you can set aside for that right now. So in summary, there are 4 categories: your business setup costs, your production costs, your marketing costs, and your development costs. And roughly, this will add up to about $40,000. Now don't freak out. I know you clicked on this video because you have limited funding and you want to start with just $0. And that's totally fine. But the reality of the situation is in order to have a successful, sustainable fashion brand, you are going to have to invest some money in it, but we can be smart about it. We can be smart about how much you need. We can be smart about when you pay for things. And we can also be smart about how you get the funding. And that's what we're going to break down next. Now that we have broken down the typical startup costs for a sustainable fashion brand, let's talk about how we can get there. So my next tip is to be smart about when you pay for things. I am not telling you to fork over $40,000 or whatever you need right now. You can stagger this out until you are ready for it. And that's the beauty of being smart about when you pay for things. So upfront and right away, you will likely need to do some market research, and that's totally free. You need to figure out who you're targeting, what they want, and just talk to them. And you don't need to spend a dime doing that. Once you've solidified what you need to make based on your target customer and what problems you're going to be solving for them, then you can go and pay for a designer. Then and only then, because you want to make sure you're not wasting money. And so design costs are typically upfront, and this is a worthwhile investment for you. You want to make sure that your products are kosher when it comes to giving them to your manufacturer. And then next, you can get materials and you can get swatches, and you can request those for free. So you can start to test things out. And then when it comes to a production perspective, because that's usually where the biggest budget spend is, we recommend a pre-sales model, and I will talk about that shortly. So that way you can get customers to fund you up front. And then in regards to the lawyers and the accountant fees, those are things that you don't necessarily need to set up until you launch. So that means you can push it down the road as well. Same with your marketing costs, like your Shopify website and your advertising. So don't freak out. You can stagger when you need to spend this money, and you can also start to save up for it and plan for it. So be smart about when you spend this money. I'm not telling you to fork over all this cash right now. You can stagger and spread it out. And my third tip is to keep things simple. In addition to being smart about when you spend your money, keep things simple. Don't add unnecessary complexity to your business, especially if you're first starting out. Complexity means that you have to spend more time, more energy, and more resources managing it, and that's just a waste of all of that, especially when you're first starting out. It's very unnecessary, so keep things simple. For example, when it comes to your products, make sure you are launching with 1 product, max 2 products. You really want to make sure that you are knocking those things out of the park. And then by keeping things lean, you can also likely just use 1 material, which saves you costs. And from a production perspective, that can ease some of the stress as well. So if you don't have a lot of funding, you don't need to have a 10-piece collection. That's just not necessary right now. You can add more products later, but make sure your first launch goes really well. And then another example is with your marketing. So for example, with Shopify, keep that simple as well. Just pick a theme that is great, and you don't need to do custom coding. You don't need to do any of that. Just pick an existing theme. And with your marketing platforms, just choose 1 social media platform and then email marketing. And then that way you can really build your community on both those platforms. If you're going to be doing ads, you can just concentrate it on those 2 platforms. and just keep things simple. Don't add a bunch of complexity to your business. In addition to being smart about when you pay for things and also keeping things simple, be thrifty. That is my next tip. And instead of looking at it as you don't have a lot of money or you're being cheap, think of it as being intentional about how you spend your resources. That is a very different energy, and it's important to think about it that way. When you are more resourceful and when you're being pressured to think differently, people actually get quite creative. So instead of being upset that you don't have all the funding you need, just look at this as a challenge to be resourceful, be creative, and be very intentional about how you're spending your money. And like I previously mentioned, you need to know your numbers. Do not stick your head in the sand. So take the time to think out, do I really need to spend my money on this? Or how can I creatively get different solutions? The caveat is though, don't unnecessarily not spend money if you actually need to. So like for your production, you obviously need to do that. For your design costs, don't DIY that yourself. But just be very intentional and just be very conscious about how you're spending your money. That's the tip. Like, don't just spend money left, right, and center, especially at the beginning if you're bootstrapping. Be very resourceful, be creative, and be intentional. And before I dive into how we're going to get the money to fund this, I wanted to quickly interrupt and say that we have a free ebook, which is our launch method that helps our clients successfully launch and make at minimum $20,000. This ebook is valued at over 50 USD, it's 30 pages long, and it details my secret strategies as well as exercises to help you be successful. So if you haven't already, download and snag this ebook. You can do so at recloseted.com/launch or click the link in the description box. Now let's get back to the video. Now let's talk about how we're going to get the funding you need to invest in your brand. My next tip is to leverage a pre-sales model. Essentially, your customers are going to prepay you for the products, and then you're going to use that funding and also the inventory count to go off and get those products made. This is great because when you first launch, you likely don't have an idea of how much demand or how much inventory you need, so this is more sustainable from a production perspective. But also from a funding perspective, you know, because I outlined the costs for you, that production costs tend to be the highest. And so by getting your customers to prepay you, you can take care of those costs. My recommendation when it comes to executing pre-sales though is to do it on your own website. Do not leverage a site like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and there are two reasons why I don't recommend that to our clients. First of all, they take 5% off the top. And when your margins are already so important as a new brand and you want to be as profitable as possible ASAP, this is not great. And then secondly, you don't build your brand if you are selling off of Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Because if you think about it, when customers buy from these sites, they typically just say, yeah, I got this shirt from Kickstarter or I got it from Indiegogo, and they never really talk about the brand behind it. So for those reasons, I recommend you launch your pre-sales off of your own website. And in regards to how you're going to execute your pre-sales successfully, we recommend our launch method formula, which is in the ebook and also what we walk through with our clients. Essentially, there are 4 stages to executing the pre-sales. The first stage is all about your marketing. And this is so important because we want to be building your community and building buzz well in advance of your launch. That way, when you finally do launch and your pre-sales are ready to be ordered and people can actually buy, you're not just launching to your friends and family because that is not a sustainable or a viable business. So we need to take at least 8 months to build up your community and really ensure that you are successful. And then the next phase is all about the actual launch. And in regards to your pre-sale, you're going to be launching in 2 to 3 week intervals. That is key because that way customers know that they just can't buy anytime, and that also helps you from a fulfillment side. Because if pre-sales are always open, then you're going to be getting one-off orders, and that makes it so difficult from a manufacturing perspective and even ordering materials, because you'll probably have to have materials on hand, and you'll probably be bothering your manufacturer every other day around fulfilling these orders. So it's good to have your cart open only for 2 to 3 weeks. And then during those 2 to 3 weeks, promote it every single day. Tell your customers and tell them that they can only purchase it during these 2 to 3 weeks, and then the cart's gonna close. And then after that, you're gonna move into the third stage, which is fulfillment. And this is important because you've closed your cart, you know exactly how many orders you have, exactly how much inventory to go out and do, and you're just gonna fulfill and ship those orders. And from a mental sanity perspective, pre-sales can be gnarly to execute. So we've perfected this with our clients so that at every stage, they are just focusing on one thing. We're keeping things simple. And so it's marketing to begin with, and then it's your launch, and then it's fulfillment. And then finally, the last stage is back to marketing, because you always want to continuously have new customers to sell to. So it's really important, and you don't just have to open your cart once. You can say that you had so much demand and people really wanted these products, so you can open it again and you can continue the cycle however many times you need to. But this method really allows you to take care of the production costs, and those, as you saw at the beginning of the video, tend to be the bulk of the costs. So make sure you leverage our launch method formula. You market first, you really build your community, then you go out and you launch, and you are very targeted during a 2 to 3 week launch period. Then you fulfill, and then you go back to marketing and re-nurturing and rebuilding up your audience. In addition to pre-sales, my next tip is to also leverage self-funding. So in addition to the production costs, you also know you have your business setup costs, your marketing costs, and also your development costs. Because you're not going to be able to leverage pre-sales to cover those items, I recommend self-funding. And what that means is essentially you yourself are funding your business. And you can do that through 2 ways. First of all, you can leverage your savings if you have savings, but just put boundaries around this, because I don't necessarily want you to put your entire life savings in there just in case you have a rainy day personally and you need to be able to get out of a situation. So decide for you personally what those boundaries are and what that looks like. And then the second method you can do that is with supplemental income. So if you don't already, you can leverage your 9 to 5, or you can get freelance work or contracting work. But the key here is to be able to get supplemental income that will not infringe too much on building your brand. You want to make sure if you have a 9 to 5 job, you can still work after hours and on weekends on your brand, because this takes time. Or if you have a freelance gig, if it's really stressful and you're thinking about it 24/7, that's probably not the best for you. So just be smart around how that happens. And with the self-funding too, it's a loan you're essentially giving your business. If we're smart and you are really intentional about how you spend money and you're thrifty and you're resourceful, this is simply just some upfront capital you're putting in. And then once you launch and you get those pre-sale orders, you can start to fulfill and pay for production, but also start to pay yourself back as well. That's typically what we see with our clients. And if you're really thrifty and you're nimble and you bootstrap your business, you will be able to do that as well. So make sure you leverage pre-sales and make sure you leverage your own funding or your savings or whatever you need to be able to start your brand. And so even if you have $0, even if you have limited funding, you can make it work. If you watched until this point, comment "Money will not hold me back from a successful launch" so that we can cheer you on and support you. Additionally, make sure you download our free ebook if you haven't already, because it is jam-packed with my secret strategies. It has our launch method in there, and also free resources and exercises to support you. You can download it at www.recloseted.com/launch, and also using the link in the description box. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that it was helpful for you. If you have any questions, make sure you comment them down below and I will personally get back to you. And together, let's transform the harmful fashion industry.